Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. If you're the kind of person who loves breaking down fascinating, complex texts just to understand what makes them tick, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're taking an objective, structured look at the foundational arguments in Chapter 1 of Ryuho Okawa's The Laws of Salvation. We're going to unpack the author's core thesis right from the ground up.
Okay, let's dive right into this. The book kicks off with a massive, almost mystery-like question. Why is religion fundamentally necessary in the modern age? Okawa argues that our modern society has completely lost sight of something essential. And this text, it's his attempt to explain exactly why that happened, and more importantly, how to fix it.
So, our source material for today is Okawa's The Laws of Salvation. We're going to map out the architecture of his beliefs here. What exactly is his thesis? Who's he critiquing? And what is the ultimate call to action he presents to his followers?
Here is our roadmap for today. First, why religion is necessary. 2, humans as spiritual beings. 3, the blind spots of education and media. 4, the new salvation movement. And finally, 5, the mission of spreading the word.
All right, let's get into Section 1, Why Religion is Necessary.
Right off the bat, Okawa grounds his whole argument in this profound, really urgent sense of mission. He points out that he's been preaching continuously, literally without rest, for over 25 years. He's published over 600 books and produced multiple films. And he frames this massive output not just as, a resume, but as hard evidence of a burning responsibility to deliver truths from a higher spiritual realm.
He looks at this necessity through a really specific historical lens. Think about it. Roughly 2,500 years have passed since the death of the Buddha, right? And Okawa argues that teachings from millennia ago, even if they were originally universal, naturally struggle to hold up against the crazy, rapid changes of our modern era. So, to spark a true new civilization, he asserts that a brand new teaching absolutely has to be born.
Moving right along to Section 2, Humans as Spiritual Beings.
Now, Okawa's entire philosophy rests on this one unavoidable premise. Humans are spiritual beings, and the spirit dwells in the physical body. And he doesn't just treat this like some poetic metaphor. For him, this is concrete reality. It's presented as the absolute bedrock of all major world religions.
But here's the catch, and Okawa readily admits this. Accepting this spiritual reality is often life's first and, honestly, hardest hurdle. And he points the finger directly at modern, highly educated people. He argues that society's elites are actually the ones who are most likely to stumble at this very foundational step. Kind of ironic, right?
Which brings us to Section 3, Blind Spots of Education and Media.
So, if society is failing to grasp this fundamental truth, whose fault is it? Well, Okawa draws this massive contrast between a secular and a spiritual worldview, putting the blame squarely on modern institutions. He argues that schools completely ignore the spiritual dimension. They teach a version of reality that only acknowledges the physical world, basically leaving people totally unprepared for the soul's eternal journey. And his critique of the press, it's really pointed. He claims that mass media in modern democracies utterly fails the public when it comes to religion. They either remain completely indifferent, just pretending faith doesn't even exist, or they only report on it when there's some juicy scandal. This lack of active, positive affirmation, according to the text, deeply, deeply skews society's perception.
All right, Section 4, The New Salvation Movement.
To counter all this spiritual blindness, Okawa outlines a brand new salvation movement, and it's built on 3 highly specific pillars. First, actively teaching the spiritual view of life that schools ignore. Second, teaching the right way to live. And third, firmly establishing religion as a necessary force for good in the public eye.
The really crucial detail here is how he defines that right way to live. He argues that earthly laws, they just aren't enough. Right and wrong are ultimately judged by heavenly standards dictated by a supreme being. And understanding this is absolutely vital, because your adherence to these heavenly standards directly impacts the trajectory of your soul after death.
And finally, Section 5, Mission of Spreading the Word.
To motivate his followers, Okawa makes a remarkably bold theological claim here. He says the era of temporary teachings is over. He declares that we are currently living in the time of Buddha's rebirth and the descent of a supreme being named Cantare. And because of this monumental, earth-shattering event, there's an absolute mandate to spread these teachings to the very ends of the earth.
But how does a person even act on a massive global mandate like that? Well, the text says, by starting incredibly small. The chapter wraps up by emphasizing that massive change doesn't always need grand gestures. Just handing out a single pamphlet or inviting a friend to watch a film, these are small actions that when multiplied by thousands of people can create a massive wave of light.
Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. If society were to completely abandon its secular focus and universally adopt the heavenly judged lens advocated in this text, how would our global future functionally change? It's a pretty provocative question, and it's exactly what the rest of the author's work attempts to answer. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.